The war in Ukraine was a wake-up call for the West. Was it a wake-up call for you too, or did you see this coming?
No, I didn't foresee this. But I think the wake-up call to the West has been going on for a long time. So even if we couldn't be sure what he was going to do, the West, in my view, has been essentially in retreat for over a decade. You know, this is a problem for us, and we've got to deal with it.
So let's talk about this Western retreat. There's lots of reasons for that, but one reason I think that many give is that it is essentially a legacy of Western overreach, particularly the war in Iraq. Do you think that the war that many people think was disastrous and illegal, the invasion of Iraq, has reduced appetite in the West for military intervention, and indeed did it embolden and strengthen Vladimir Putin?
I don't think it emboldened or strengthened him. Whether you agreed or disagreed with the military action, Saddam Hussein removed the Taliban in order to replace it with a democratic process. Compare and contrast that with Putin. He went into Syria to prop up a dictator. There were chemical weapons used against the Syrian population by Assad. We took no action. So I think that's what he sees.
Vladimir Putin is rightly, his invasion has been called a crime of aggression. But, many people call the Iraq invasion a crime of aggression. It didn't have UN sanctions. You hear this. You hear that the West has double standards. What do you say to that?
I think what we've got to do is punch back very hard when people come at us with this. Okay, you may disagree with what was done, but compare getting rid of a brutal dictatorship and trying to replace it with a democracy. Okay, you can say that it was a flawed effort and there were failures attached to it, but that was, as it were, something supported, by the way, by the Iraqi people when they turned out to vote in the election. Compare and contrast that with literally invading a country that's no threat to you whatever, and a country that's never proved any problem for anyone. Come on.
What happened in Afghanistan last year, the nature of US withdrawal, isn't there an argument that could have emboldened Vladimir Putin because he thought he would get away with it?
Yeah, sure it did, but the point is we didn't need to do it. We could have stayed there, and we could have helped the country over a longer period of time. Now, of course, but that goes to the point right round the world you see this. I mean, my institute does a lot of work in Africa. You see all over Africa the influence now of China and now increasingly of Russia. The West is slow, it's bureaucratic, it doesn't work out how to build the right relationships, and yet many of these countries would prefer a relationship with America, with Western countries. So my point is a very simple one. It's that if the West wants to get back on the front foot, it's got to do a number of things that are really important, and they're all linked together by one concept, which is strategy. You've got to have a strategic, long-term view of the West and its place in the world. If you do that, then all the other things can flow from that and you can get back on the front foot again.
Can there be a lasting peace with Putin in the Kremlin?
I don't know. I don't think no one's going to believe any commitments that he gives, any assurances that he gives. And I do think out of this will come two things. One, I think this will prove his downfall eventually. That's my guess. I'm not saying it will happen immediately, but he's turned Russia into a pariah state amongst the West at least, and crippled his economy. But the second thing is that Ukraine will emerge as a stronger, more independent state, probably eventually a member of the European Union, I would say.
So was President Biden right when he said this man must go?
Well, he was just expressing an emotional response. Look, I think most people are sitting there thinking, how can you do this? I mean, literally, how can you do this? And when the tales of these atrocities in Bucha and elsewhere come out, and you see, I mean, 2022 on the doorstep of the European Union, it's evil, actually.
But this does have sort of policy consequences, because you can agree that it's very hard to see lasting peace with this man in the Kremlin, and also agree that regime change should not be the goal of Western policy. But what then should be the goal of Western policy vis-à-vis Putin, given where he appears to be?
You have to both ratchet up the pressure and try and get a structured negotiation and get an agreement that at least halts the hostilities. You know, he deserves to be completely defeated. But I think the longer this conflict goes on, that becomes extremely difficult. So I think I find it very hard to see how you make a deal now.
Do you agree with President Zelensky that the West should be imposing tougher sanctions, particularly the Europeans, and there should be more weaponry, more offensive weaponry?
Yes, I basically agree with that. I think you've got to toughen up the sanctions. I mean, the distinction between defensive and offensive weapons capabilities at a certain point becomes a bit meaningless. They need the ability to be able to push back hard on the Russians, and that I think does require tanks, long-range missiles, other heavy artillery.
Are Europeans insufficiently prepared to suffer themselves for this? I mean, do you think there is a sense of the stakes?
Well, there will be some anxiety, but we all are going to suffer some short-term pain. Look, Europe has come together in a pretty remarkable way, but we're going to have to go further. And the risk, the principal risk now is escalation, because if you can't find a way to bring the conflict to an end, and it's clear that Putin is going to struggle to win this militarily, the question is, how desperate does he become?